Usually, when we think about how to get faster or fitter or, just stronger, we focus entirely on the action itself, like the sets, the reps, the biomechanics of how our foot strikes the ground.
Right, the actual movement.
Exactly. We treat the environment around us like it's just this empty container. A field is a field, a gym is a gym. We kind of just assume the environment is passive and all the biological magic comes strictly from our own effort.
Which, honestly, ignores a really fundamental rule of biology. I mean, an organism always adapts to the specific geometry of its habitat. So when you start looking at the actual physical boundaries of the spaces where athletes train, that empty container isn't passive at all.
Not at all.
Those invisible lines painted on the grass are actively rewriting the physiological capabilities of the people running between them.
And that concept, that is the core of our deep dive today. We are exploring a really fascinating 2024 study, and the title is quite a mouthful. It's called Can the Pitch Dimension Influence the Physical Fitness Adaptations Induced by Small-Sided Training Programs Added to Regular In-Field Training? A randomized controlled study in youth soccer players.
Yeah, quite the academic title there.
It is,
Right.
but it was authored by Liang Wang, YuHua Kang, LiXin MingBang Li, and Wang. And this was published in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine just in 2024.
Really recent stuff.
Yeah, super fresh. And our mission today is to break down this randomized controlled trial with, scientific clarity, but also to just understand exactly how altering the physical geometry of a training environment biologically adapts athletes over time. So, okay, let's unpack this. In youth soccer, and team sports in general, really, there is this massive reliance on small-sided games, or SSGs.
Oh, absolutely. Coaches love them. I mean, they love them because they seemingly do everything at once. They bundle physical endurance, technical ball skills, and tactical awareness all into just a single drill.
Yeah, instead of just making players run mindless laps for cardiovascular fitness, right?
Exactly. And then, moving to some static passing drill, a small-sided game wraps all those stimuli into actual gameplay. So the players are so hyper-focused on the opponent and the ball that they don't even realize they are effectively performing rigorous high-intensity interval training.
Yeah, and the literature really backs that up entirely regarding aerobic fitness. Like, small-sided games are just phenomenal for building a player's engine. But the specific gap in the science, the problem that Wang and his team wanted to solve here, is what happens when we look at top-end sprint speed.
Right. The sprint data is so messy.
It is. The data on small-sided games improving a player's acceleration and maximum velocity is just wildly inconsistent. I mean, some studies show marginal improvements, while others show absolutely zero gains in speed.
Because traditional, straight line sprint training usually beats small-sided games hands down when it comes to developing fast-twitch muscle capabilities. And for years, the sports science community essentially just shrugged and accepted that limitation.
Yeah, like, it is what it is.
Right. The prevailing thought was simply, well, small-sided games are for endurance and ball touches, not for building sprinters.
But Wang and his team looked at that inconsistent data and asked this brilliant, really foundational question. Like, what if the problem isn't the small-sided game format itself? What if the inconsistent sprint results are happening because researchers have been completely ignoring the shape of the pitch as an independent variable?
Right, and what's fascinating here is the vital distinction between an acute external load and a chronic structured adaptation.
Break that down a bit.
Sure. So we had prior data suggesting that if you put players on a larger, elongated pitch for just a single practice session, they naturally accumulate more high-speed running meters that day.
Because they just have more space to run.
Exactly. But that is the acute external load, the immediate demand of that specific afternoon. What makes this 2024 study so innovative is the timeline. The researchers asked if repeated exposure to a specific geometric shape over an 8-week period would actually force the body to biologically restructure itself.
Like, does playing on a rectangle instead of a square actually permanently alter your neuromuscular system?
Yeah, that's the exact hypothesis.
Let me throw an analogy out to visualize this for you. Think of it like running in a long hallway versus running in a small square room. Let's assume the total square footage of both spaces is identical.
Okay, like this.
Right. If you spend 20 minutes running around the square room, dodging walls, stepping, turning, your heart rate goes through the roof, you're exhausted. But you never hit your absolute top sprint speed because the moment you accelerate, you run out of room and have to hit the brakes.
You just slam into a wall.
Literally. But take that exact same square footage and you stretch it out into a long hallway, and suddenly you have a runway. You can open up your stride, hit maximum velocity, and actually sustain it. So I'm guessing the researchers suspected simply stretching the pitch gives the athletes the physical runway needed to trigger those sprint adaptations.
Yeah, the hallway analogy really helps visualize the space, but it does ignore the psychological and tactical driver of the sport, which is the ball.
Oh, right. It's not just a track meet.
Exactly. It isn't just about giving them an empty runway. It is about how the geometry of the pitch fundamentally dictates tactical behavior, which in turn dictates the biological response. Because sprinting is a really complex biomechanical event.
Yeah.
It requires the central nervous system to fire fast-twitch muscle fibers in a highly specific rhythmic pattern. It demands maximum force production from the glutes and hamstrings. And you simply cannot recruit those when you're taking short, choppy steps in a confined space.
So they hypothesized that an elongated pitch naturally creates tactical situations, like long counterattacks, that force players to instinctively open up their stride.
Right. They are essentially tricking the nervous system into sprint training by altering the boundaries of the game.
But if the theory is that shape dictates biology, the real challenge becomes how you isolate that geometry in a real-world experiment without, other variables muddying the waters.
And the study design here is exceptionally rigorous. They utilized a randomized controlled trial with 48 trained male youth soccer players. They were averaging about 16 and a half years old.
Okay, so these aren't beginners.
No, not at all. These are developmental athletes already accustomed to a solid baseline of training, usually 3 to 4 times a week.
So they took those 48 players and split them evenly into 3 groups. The control group simply continued their regular infield training sessions. Nothing changed for them. But the 2 experimental groups are where the geometry comes into play. The first was the elongated group, playing on a pitch with a length-to-width ratio of 2 to 1, so 40 meters long and 20 meters wide.
A literal rectangle.
Yeah. And the second was the square group, playing on a 1-to-1 ratio pitch, which was 28 meters long and 28 meters wide.
And this specific setup introduces the most crucial control variable of the entire methodology, because the researchers ensured the relative area per player was nearly identical.
Right.
In the elongated group, each player had exactly 100 square meters of space. And in the square group, each player had roughly 98 square meters.
That is the detail that anchors the entire study for me. I mean,
Okay.
both groups of kids had the exact same amount of grass to work with. The total area didn't change, only the shape.
Exactly.
If the elongated group had been given a massive sprawling field while the square group played in a phone booth, we wouldn't know if the biological changes were due to the shape or just the sheer volume of space.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
By locking in that relative area, pitch shape becomes the isolated, independent variable. So over the 8-week intervention, both experimental groups added 2 small-sided game sessions a week to their routine.
And what were the rules of those games?
They played 4 versus 4. The structure was 3 bouts of 4 minutes of continuous play with a 3-minute rest period in between. They used small goals, no goalkeepers, and no offside rules. But the most vital instruction wasn't actually for the players, it was for the coaches.
Oh. What did the coaches have to do?
Nothing. The coaches were strictly forbidden from giving any tactical instructions or verbal encouragement.
Wow, so they literally dropped these players into a geometric shape and let the environment serve as the only coach. The grass dictated the behavior.
Basically, yeah.
Well, to measure if that behavior actually forced an adaptation, they obviously needed precise assessments before and after that 8-week block. And they tested aerobic capacity using the yo-yo intermittent recovery test level 1.
The dreaded yo-yo test.
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't done it, this is a grueling protocol. You run 20-meter shuttles back and forth, trying to keep pace with an audio beep that gets progressively faster until you hit absolute muscular failure.
It is the gold standard for team sports, though, because it incorporates a 10-second active recovery jog between every shuttle, so it perfectly mimics the severe stop-and-go metabolic demands of a soccer match.
Which is way better than just, a continuous 2-mile run on a track.
Right.
And then for the sprint assessment, they tested a 30-meter linear sprint. But crucially, they didn't rely on coaches holding stopwatches. They used electronic photocells at the start and finish lines.
Because photocells are non-negotiable at this level of sports science.
To get completely objective speed data, right?
Exactly. When tracking chronic sprint adaptations in trained athletes, the improvements are measured in hundredths of a second. So the slight delay of a human thumb clicking a stopwatch introduces a margin of error that's larger than the adaptation itself.
That makes total sense. So we have the players isolated in their specific geometries for 2 solid months. Let's look at the biological outcomes, starting with the aerobic capacity. The yo-yo test data showed that small-sided games, regardless of the shape of the pitch, are just an unbelievable stimulus for cardiovascular endurance.
Oh, the numbers are stark. The elongated group increased their total running distance on the yo-yo test by roughly 333
This
meters.
jump.
Yeah. And the square group saw an almost identical leap, increasing by 308 meters. Meanwhile, the control group only improved by 10 meters over the same 2 months.
Wow.
The constant accelerating, decelerating, and just battling for possession in a 4 versus 4 setting engages massive amounts of muscle mass and drives incredible metabolic adaptations.
So if a coach just wants to build an aerobically dominant team, the shape of the small-sided game is kind of irrelevant. The format itself guarantees a fitter athlete.
Pretty much.
But here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the entire premise of the study was to see if geometry could fix the gap in sprint performance.
Right. And the 30-meter sprint data provides a pretty definitive answer here. The elongated group, so the ones playing on the 40 by 20 meter pitch, they actually shaved 0.092 seconds off their sprint times.
And just to put 0.092 seconds into a real-world context for you listening, over a 30-meter distance, that translates to a player being a full meter or more ahead of a defender.
Yeah, it's a mass.
It is the absolute difference between winning a breakaway or just getting tackled from behind.
It is a huge physiological leap for an 8-week block. But the contrast with the square group is the true revelation. Because the players on the 28 by 28 meter pitch with the exact same square footage per player, remember, they only improved by 0.017 seconds.
Barely anything.
Right. From a statistical standpoint, the square group's sprint times were practically no different than the control group, who didn't even play the extra games at all.
That is wild. The square group spent 2 months doing high-intensity intervals, got incredibly fit, but didn't get any faster than kids who just did standard practice. Meanwhile, the elongated group, doing the exact same amount of work in the exact same format, became definitively faster athletes.
Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, the biology adapted to the tactical demands of the geometry.
Right.
On an elongated pitch, with 2-to-1 ratio, the longitudinal axis becomes the defining feature of the game. When a team wins the ball, the immediate tactical solution is a rapid vertical counterattack.
Because they have 40 meters of depth.
Exactly. Players can make long, continuous linear or curvilinear runs. They have the physical runway to accelerate, achieve that upright sprinting posture, hit maximum velocity, and sustain it. Do that repeatedly over 8 weeks, and the nervous system wires itself to fire those fast-twitch muscle fibers more efficiently.
But the square pitch actively prevents that specific biomechanical event.
Entirely. A 1-to-1 ratio pitch restricts depth to 28 meters, but expands the width. So the tactical solution shifts from vertical counterattacks to horizontal, possession-oriented play.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the team spreads out, the ball circulates along the wings, the physical demands become super heavy on the quadriceps, constant changes of direction, incredibly short accelerations, and immediate heavy decelerations.
So they're working at maximum effort, which explains the aerobic gains, but the physical boundary of the square forces them to brake before they ever reach top speed.
Exactly. The geometry simply doesn't allow the central nervous system to practice maximal velocity.
So the environment literally pulls the behavior out of the athlete, and that behavior restructures their cellular makeup. You don't tell the player to run faster, you just change the shape of the box they operate inside, and their body does the math.
It's incredible.
It really is. But, I mean, we can't look at an 8-week study and assume it is flawless, right?
Good science requires looking critically at the methodology to understand exactly what the data can and cannot tell us. Yeah, and this raises an important question regarding the internal load measurements, which the authors themselves actually highlight as a limitation. During the 8 weeks of small-sided games, the researchers did not equip the players with wearable MEMS technology.
And MEMS being microelectromechanical system.
Correct. These are the advanced wearable units you see professional athletes wearing, like in their sports bras or vests, that contain GPS, accelerometers, and gyroscopes.
Right.
They don't just track distance. They measure the exact G-force of a player planting their foot to decelerate, or the precise number of meters a player spends running above 20 kilometers per hour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But because the researchers didn't use MEMS, they are blind to the acute mechanical dosage. We know the elongated group got faster chronically over 2 months, but we don't know the exact second-by-second volume of high-speed running that triggered the change.
So we see the destination, but we are missing the granular map of the journey.
Beautifully put, yeah.
Well, another choice in the methodology that caught my eye was the lack of progressive overload. I mean, in a standard strength or conditioning program, you make the stimulus harder as the weeks go on to keep challenging the body's new baseline. But here, they kept the exact same 4 versus 4, 3 bouts of 4 minutes format for the entire 2 months.
Yeah, and implementing progressive periodization, perhaps lengthening the bouts to 5 minutes or, I don't know, shortening the rest periods in week 4 could have yielded even more pronounced adaptations.
Right, they could have pushed them harder.
However, researchers often avoid progressive overload in these specific trials to keep the variables as clean as possible. Because if they change the intensity midway through, it would be a lot harder to definitively attribute the sprint gains purely to the pitch geometry.
Oh, that makes sense. Keep the dosage identical, so the shape is the only shifting variable.
Exactly.
But that leads to maybe the biggest structural critique of the study: the volume of training compared to the control group. Because the two experimental groups performed their regular training, plus an additional 24 minutes of small-sided games twice a week.
Right. They accumulated 48 minutes of extra high-intensity workload per week compared to the control group.
So when we look at those massive aerobic gains on the yo-yo test, part of that leap is inherently tied to the fact that they simply ran for an extra 48 minutes a week, right?
Definitely.
For future research to be truly airtight, the training volumes need to match perfectly. Like, the control group would need to perform 48 minutes of a different non-game-based running drill to prove conclusively that the aerobic adaptation comes from the small-sided game format itself rather than just the extra time on the field.
Yeah, volume matching is absolutely essential to isolate the training modality. The authors also correctly point out that this study only tested a 4 versus 4 format. We don't yet know if increasing the density to, say, 6 versus 6 on an elongated pitch would dilute the sprint adaptations.
Because the physical space becomes too crowded to reach top speed.
Exactly. More bodies in the same space means less runway.
That makes total sense. But I mean, even factoring in those limitations, the core takeaway is remarkably strong because of the comparison between the two experimental groups. They both performed the exact same extra 48 minutes of work. They both experienced identical fatigue, but only the elongated group adapted to become faster.
It's a really powerful finding.
Bringing this out of the laboratory and into your daily routine, whether you're a coach designing drills, a personal trainer building a circuit, or just someone trying to program your own workouts, the lesson is clear. The physical constraints of your environment dictate your biological adaptations.
You are constantly interacting with the space around you. I mean, if your goal is to develop top-end speed, you cannot achieve it in a confined area that requires constant braking and turning.
Yeah.
You must actively seek out or build an environment that allows for uninterrupted linear movement. You have to build the runway if you want the body to take flight.
So what does this all mean? Well, small-sided games are a highly reliable tool for drastically improving aerobic capacity, and the specific shape of the pitch doesn't significantly alter that cardiovascular benefit. But if you want to improve top-end acceleration and sprint performance, geometry is everything. You must prioritize elongated spaces that incentivize the tactical behavior of linear high-velocity running.
It forces a complete reframing of how we view our surroundings. The environment is never just a passive backdrop. It is an active participant dictating physiological development.
It really is. And that leaves me with a final, lingering thought for you to explore on your own. We spent this deep dive analyzing elite athletes on a soccer pitch. But if simply altering the physical geometry of a field can biologically restructure an athlete's fast-twitch muscle fibers in just 8 weeks, what are the invisible physical boundaries in our daily environments doing to us?
Oh.
Right. Think about the layout of your office, or the architectural flow of your neighborhood, even the specific arrangement of the furniture in your living room. How are those physical geometries subtly dictating your movement patterns, and by extension permanently shaping your biology and behavior without you ever even realizing it?
That is wild. Our environments are relentlessly training us, regardless of whether we are conscious of the protocol.
Such a fascinating concept to leave off on. We strongly encourage you to read the full article by Wang and his colleagues in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine, diving into their complete dataset, especially those methodology tables and the sprint time distributions. It just provides an incredible look at how robust the science really is. Finally, if you enjoyed unpacking this research with us today, be sure to follow the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upcoming deep dive into similarly fascinating scientific literature. We'll see you